Welcome to Changed, the podcast that's all about the stories that shape us, the moments that move us, and the growth that keeps us evolving. I'm your host, Megan Galloway, and each week we'll dive into powerful stories of transformation. Because the truth is, change is constant, and it's what we do with it that defines who we are. So whether it's a major life shift or the subtle everyday changes that lead us to something bigger, this podcast is here to inspire, challenge, and celebrate the journey of becoming. Hello and welcome. I am Megan Galloway and I am your host, and I am so happy today to have Adam Weber here with me. This is going to be an absolute treat of an episode. I already know it. We have already had some amazing conversation as we were getting geared up to do this today, and Adam and I have such similar aligned beliefs around what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a human. And we were also talking a lot this morning about what it means to challenge your own beliefs. And so I'm hoping we dig into that a little bit today as well. Adam is an executive coach. He has been through the pressure of leadership firsthand. He's co-founded and sold 2 tech companies, which is amazing. He's written a book about those experiences called Lead Like a Human. He posts about his experiences regularly on LinkedIn, so you should definitely find him there. He's been featured in Business Insider and Forbes and Fast Company. He lives in Indiana, so he's a fellow Midwesterner like myself, and he lives there with his wife, 2 sons, and his dog, Poppy. Welcome, Adam, to the podcast.
Thanks, Megan. I'm so happy to be here. It's fun to have our first conversation. I followed your content for quite some time and just think you do great work, so I'm excited to join you.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, this is going to be wonderful. Yeah, we were just commenting right before we got on about how our messaging has such similar kind of language and philosophies in it. And so it feels like we should have met before now. So I'm happy to have you on.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So the very first question I'm starting with everyone is a kind of a doozy. So let's just jump right into it. So the first question is, what is a defining moment that's changed you the most as a person?
And what I love about this podcast too is that I found out about that question 30 seconds before record. And so then it's I have to examine 43 years and go, what is that one moment? And I think for me, the singular moment that probably has created the most change in my life was right in the middle of my entrepreneurial journey. And you could say this is a work thing, but I'm not sure that it is because it gets into everything. I had my first startup, second startup was growing really quickly. I was a VP of sales at the time. I built my whole identity around being a VP of sales, was building a really fast growing company, and the board decided to take me out of that role. And it was the biggest crushed ego thing that's ever happened to me. And my whole trajectory of what I thought the next 20 to 30 years were going to be was just kind of up in arms. And they were like, but we don't want you to leave. We just want you to think about what you really should be doing here. My moment was that I went on a retreat to Montana. It was 10 days, which I feel super fortunate that I was able to do. But 4 of those days, and hang with me, all you listeners are like, what is this going to get to here? But 4 days, I was totally alone in the wilderness, water only fast. And I would say that it was the last night of those 4 days. If I had to tell you my one moment, it was like my life kind of made sense in that very last night, sitting by a tiny little fire that I made and writing a note to myself. And I would say that was probably the single most, the moment that maybe set in motion the most change in my life.
What do you think it was about that specific moment that felt like this catalyst to you, that felt like this pivot point?
Well, life is so deep. There's so many layers to it. And yet most of us live at the surface layer for the because life is also mundane. It's somehow simultaneously exceptionally deep and very mundane at the same time. And so you end up living kind of in the baby pool of who you are, kind of unexamining all these aspects of who you are. And I think in that moment, I had the gift of space. I had no phone. I had no technology with me. I had nothing to distract me other than myself. And I think it just allowed me to access in myself, and it gave me time with myself. So I think it's that. I think it was just that I was able to experience a part of me that I had kind of forgotten about.
I think that's so absolutely beautiful because I do think a lot of us are uncomfortable now with just being by ourselves, in ourselves, because, like, even think about it like standing in line at the grocery store. Our first gut instinct nowadays is to check our phone and see if we've missed a Slack or a text or check socials or whatever it might be. And our lives are so fueled with the serotonin hits of being needed all the time by different people inside of our lives that I do think it's really hard to just sit and be by ourselves in our own heads, thinking about who we want to be. Did you go through like a withdrawal of being around people and like inside of those first couple of days? Like, tell me about that transition.
Less than I expected. I was kind of overwhelmed at the beginning with, like, realizing how much I liked myself, and in a kind way. I was just, like, so pleased. I was like, "Gosh, I really enjoy this." I think also someone who maybe, part of my own leadership journey prior to that was, like, learning how to not be a people pleaser. Like, I was too nice early in my leadership journey. Like, I first time I let somebody go, it was devastating to them because they had no idea. And I was like, never again. Like, I'm not, that isn't nice. What is, it's like, I want to be someone who's clear and who's honest and who sets a high bar, but is consistently clear with it. But I think because of that, like, people pleasing compulsion that I was working through in my own life, like, there was an over attachment to others. And, like, I was sort of just kind of immediately pleasantly surprised with like, oh, well, I really like you. Where you been? Just like I was just kind of reconnecting with myself.
Hmm. So you're writing this note to yourself. What was it about that moment and writing this note to yourself that then made you go back to being around other human beings and deciding to want to like be a different human in that moment?
I think it gave me space to be compassionate to my own self, and honestly compassionate to other people who've been influentials in my life, and to kind of bring peace to those relationships, both with myself and with other people who maybe were formative. And it kind of just changed how I interacted, both with people that are really close with me. But then I think that then, it changes how you interact with everyone. So I think there's that component to it. I think there was just like a working through of a lot of stuff in my own journey. Like, I realized I have all these fears and insecurities that were fueling, like, most people who become entrepreneurs have some deep seated fear or insecurity. And then it manifests itself in these, like, very outward facing ways toward other people. That's why there's things like leadership coaching and things like, because you end up causing harm or damage, or because you have this, in many ways, like an unexamined life, and you're kind of living in this shallow end component trying to reconnect. So I think being able to have space to heal, and I would love to say it was like, oh, an awakening that never needed re-examined. That's not how it is. But things like, I had this deep-seated fear that I was going to lose my home, like a poverty mindset that plagued me. I was a VP of sales of a venture-backed tech company with a still really early in my career with a really clear path to it. So it served me early in my career. It allowed me to, like, have this immense drive that maybe worked harder than an average person would work, and it wasn't serving me anymore. It was like something that I was able to, like, let go of, while I was out there, and go, you know what? Like, that was, thank you for what you did for me. Mine's, that aspect of my personality, but, like, I don't need this anymore. It's okay to leave this in the past.
I think that scarcity mindset when you're an entrepreneur is so real because I think that when you're inside of corporate and you have the illusion of safety, inside of a job that's in someone else's control, so to speak, then it allows you can kind of set that fear aside. But when ultimately your success is on you as an entrepreneur and you have the opportunity to make or break your financial future, I think that that scarcity mindset then like comes into play massively. And to your point, like plays on other deep rooted fears that exist inside of every single one of us because we're human beings and we all have fears and we all have backgrounds and histories and traumas that have shaped who we are. And I think that when you're in that pressure cooker, like you're talking about being in a venture backed startup, like if there is a pressure cooker, I feel like that is one of the finest
It
of
is.
those of the pressure cookers that life can give us, you know?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it takes a career's worth of life experience, and it's like it just presses it all into a very condensed time horizon. which I'm grateful for. Like, it gave me a lot of life experience and so many unique situations and all of that. But what's interesting for me is when I look back on it, I had one moment specifically where I was like, "Why do you feel so hurt by this?" When every day I used to wake up and check my retirement account and ask this is the thing I remember writing down. I was like, "How much longer do I have to do this?" And so I was like, "Well, sheesh, maybe I'm not in my perfect maybe I'm not living kind of in flow with myself if, like, my main prevailing thought is, 'How much longer do I have to keep doing this?'" So, it was really, like, feeling released from that, and when I released myself from that, then it opened up some other conversations, like, "Well, what is it that you like, why did you do this in the first place?" Like, deeper than just making money, deeper than the insecurity, like, why this topic? Like, why do you care about leadership? Why do you care about other people? And like, what is the work that you has brought you joy and energy? Like, what are you being drawn toward? And so it kind of set in motion those type of things as well.
When it sounds like to reflect back a little bit too, and I guess part of this is probably coming from my own biased experience as well, because I spent 2 years at a venture-backed startup as well, and I was not a founding member. I joined about 3 months after they got funding, and I was the head of sales for a lot of that time, then moved into being the head of operations, and one of the things I noticed during that time is that I shifted from having one set path that I thought was, like, my path inside of my career to all of a sudden having this, like, opening of potential options of places to go, and there wasn't just one way to get there anymore. Like, for you, I'm hearing you say, like, all of a sudden it changed from me being like, "I'm gonna be the VP of sales, and I'm going to help drive sales forward inside of this organization, and my career is gonna be in sales," to breaking open into lots of different possibilities of ways that you could feel fulfilled and achieve the things that you wanted to get to in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And in many ways, it was much less about what was next and more about just being in like understanding myself like as a person and then now then kind of living inside of that like access the what I was like that basically ability to access that level of depth in myself. So then I think when you do that, like what it unlocked for me, and I think this is for many people, it's that you then have choice. Like you're not just kind of on this treadmill of life, kind of going, not questioning, not asking, is this like what I actually want? Does this bring me joy? Is this fulfilling to me? Is this my work to do? And it just changed that conversation with myself and gave me the just like agency. And I mean that's like professionally, I think personally, what it did was it reoriented my relationships with other people too, especially those closest with me. Maybe those closest who were like causing, like where I would like keep being hurt or, like have expectations that weren't being met. And it helped me kind of reorient my relationship with other people. It basically changed the way that I interacted with other people too, and with a more gracious posture, like seeing other people in their own journeys and like where they were as well.
Mm. Yeah, so much of our perspective is colored by our own experiences, and a lot of times we can accidentally project that onto other people, especially if we're inside of a pressure cooker. Like, I noticed that I even did that myself when I was in a pressure cooker, is that I made the assumptions that either A, everyone else's life was easier than mine because they weren't in a pressure cooker, or B, they're responding to a pressure cooker in the same way, and it's not always so. Not everyone experiences life the same way we do, but it's hard to see other people's perspectives when we're in the thick of it.
It's hard to see other people's perspectives is like a good just a good truism for, it's probably like about that same time I read like the Four Agreements, and you're going, "Oh my gosh, wow, okay." So like all of these things that I thought were like intentional to cause me harm, right? Really were. They're just people in their own in their own story, kind of thinking about themselves. And there's nothing intentional toward me at all. In many ways, everybody's kind of in their own world, living their own lives.
Hmm. So tell me if someone's listening to this right now and they're at a moment of inflection for themselves, like maybe something has happened where they've had a moment just like yours or similar to yours where change is being forced upon them. They don't necessarily want the change, but it's coming and they've got to find a way through. I think a lot of times when that kind of change happens to us and it's not something we've elected to have, like that we wished for, but then it happens to us. we feel either stuck or out of control. What's the advice that you give to someone when they're in a big moment of change?
Well, one, that your job isn't what makes you whole, and it doesn't make you of value, or, you are a person of value. I think pay attention to maybe what is giving you energy, and when you look back on, like, with that role, less your identity that you associated with that role or the company or whatever, and really, like, think about those moments where you sort of came alive, and really take some space to think about what that might be, and then, I know not everybody can take a 11-day solitude retreat, right? So, but there are many ways you can find solitude, though, and many ways you can access a more deeper version of yourself. Like, to this day, things like I go on walks every single day without my phone. It is a really critical life rhythm for me. Journaling, I think, one that is, like, so accessible, that is, like, not a retreat, but I was like, is like, floating, those, like, sensory deprivation things. I'm like, what a cool discipline for someone to have, just to go, I just need some space for my brain to process and to kind of give myself permission to think. And just anything that gives you space allows you to have intention. And when you have intention, you have choice. And it's really letting that person decide with intention what it is that they really want in their life, and then kind of follow that.
Yeah, because when things happen to us, we can't control that side of things, but we can control what we want to do about that and how we want it to impact who we want to become in the next chapter of our lives, because we're constantly changing human beings, whether we want to be or not. Yeah, that's wonderful. So tell me more about your personal change philosophy as a human being. Now that you've been through all sorts of different things, you've lived startup life, now you're a coach. How do you view change inside of your life right now?
Well, what you and I were talking about before we started recording, I think that so much change happens when you feel safe, like, as a person, and when you get to explore, and when you get to test your own beliefs. Like, I think one of the great gifts I had about, like, the age that I grew up was that I could be a kid and it wasn't recorded. And I could have beliefs that I'm, like, super embarrassed about now, and that I believed strongly, and I would get in these long debates, and I wasn't worried about it being on the internet, right? And what happened through those is that sometimes you say something with conviction that you genuinely believe in the moment, but when you say it out loud, especially to someone with a countering opinion or whatever, or, as time passes, there's something inside of you that changes, like, where you start to test your own, like, do I actually believe this? And so I do think so much change happens from being around people different than you, and people you're able to explore with, and people you can, kind of have a conversation with. I've I've always loved, and, every when I go on a date with my wife, even, I always bring questions with me. Like, I don't I like, to this, I've been married 18 years. I still, when I go on a date with my wife, I don't just, like, oh, because if without intention and great questions, we'll end up talking about that stuff at the top, that kind of surface level stuff. But change really can happen through these meaningful conversations with other people, where you, like, start to say something you've never said out loud before, and you test it.
I love your metaphor of, like, being in the baby pool and then diving into the deep end, because I do think so much of our lives, out of necessity, lives inside of the baby pool. Like, we're stuck in routines, we have responsibilities. We're living so much of our life on autopilot, as kind of like societal norms expect us to be, because we have so many things on our plate on any given day. And I think that your point about intentionality is such an important one, whether it's us challenging our own beliefs and discovering more of who we want to be, or whether it's us diving in to discover our relationship with somebody else in those moments. Like, I do think that point of intentionality is such a huge asset. That's why I love, like, Priya Parker's book around gathering spaces.
Hmm.
Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering. That's part of the reason why I love her book, is because part of what she talks about is being an intentional when you have gatherings of people, being intentional about how you name things, how people enter a space, how they're interacting inside of a space. I do think that it's so important that we bring so much intentionality into not just who we want to be when we're by ourselves and challenging our own beliefs, but also who we wanna be with other people too. Like, I do think that your metaphor there is so important, and I think that's a good question for anybody listening to this is how much of your life are you actively spending going into the deep part of the pool and making yourself feel uncomfortable on a regular basis?
Yeah. Yeah, and with that too, it's like, how do you gain perspective of depth? What are rhythms in your life that allow you to access that depth, right? And not, I'm not dismissing any of the mundane. I read the news every single day. I kind of go through my standard rhythms and have a lot of like trivial interactions. Like that's just what it means to be a human. But there's this other layer, which is like, if you just go through the day to day and you just worry about the pressing problems of this moment gets an outsized place that starts to balloon and it's not actually accurate to the total of the human experience. And so that's why I like one of the things that's always been valuable to me is reading something timelessly true. Like it could be for you, it could be a sacred text, it could be poetry. That's which is big for me. Like I love to read poetry, something that connects you and roots you in something bigger than like this kind of the rapid fire like real time reaction of today. Like who has the right opinion in this moment right now? This is the thing that we're all focused on. And it's like how do you get rooted into a bigger story for yourself that gives you perspective while you're kind of working through things?
I wish so many people would listen to this podcast, not for my own vanity, but just to hear what you just said because it's so critical. And I feel like that skill of diving in deeper in particular moments is something that we've kind of lost track of in some ways as a society. So I think that's absolutely beautiful. Okay, one last question. What's one thing that you hope never changes about who you are? We've talked a lot about things that have changed. But what about what you hope never changes about who you are?
That's a great question. I got chills. Good questions. I do think that I have a deep care for other people and that I did before. And no matter what role or life experience I've had, like I have a deep care for others and I have a very other focused perspective. I think part of my own growth journey was like making sure that I was um, other focused from a strong foundation. Like that was actually part of that. I didn't get into the full trip, but part of what I realized was that when I give through my strength, that is where I'm at my best. And when I give out of desperation or weakness or stress, that's when I'm not at my best, even though they look technically the same to others. But I think that that orientation of being in service to others is something that has been true of me since I was a kid. And I'm hopeful that it's something that's like true of me, even in my older years as well.
I probably needed to hear that today, I think, as a mom of 2 young kids and just as a person that likes to highlight others myself. I do think that there's this constant balance and having that value of putting others first, I think is so important in so many ways. And like any one of our strengths, we can accidentally overplay them and then end up in a place where we're actually not serving people even when we
Right.
want to be. So it's all about that balance.
It is. Yeah. Even as like starting a coaching practice, it's like I've decided to like cap the number of clients that I help. Could I technically have more clients in one day than I have? Yes. Does that balance of giving from my strength versus giving from my stress adjust, right? And I really try to protect that because I feel like that's a gift to give to someone is when you are giving from that strong rooted place versus the desperation side. And it's an on that is not a one and done. That was maybe a one time awakening that happened for me. It's a continual conversation though with myself, to kind of really honestly assess how I'm doing with that.
I so needed to hear that today. That's amazing. Well, let's head into speed round. Um, what is one thing that you used to hate but now you love?
Oh, seafood? Yeah, I never ate seafood until I was on, a date with my wife, and I was embarrassed about this is like, that I always said I hated seafood, and then I tried it, and it's, like, my absolute favorite now. And that didn't even happen that long, like, that was, like I was in my 20s when that happened, I'll say, mid-20s probably.
I'm in my 30s and I'm still waiting for that to
Okay.
happen to me. I'm
Y
from
y
Kansas. There's not a lot of fish from near here, unless they're coming from a lake. And I actually met my husband working in a seafood restaurant. And so I've eaten a lot of fish, but I just don't love it. So
it hasn't captured yet, and who knows, maybe it won't.
I'm hoping that it will. Cause to your point, I sometimes am like, I wish I liked it. I want to like it. I want to have this like very sophisticated palate, but I'm not quite there yet.
Okay, I know we're in speed round, but I just want to about food is one of the most interesting aspects of change, I think, because there's a maturity to food. Like in your like the stories you tell yourself when you're young, and then are you able to make adjustments, right? So like I didn't eat mushrooms as a kid. I wouldn't eat anything with tomato sauce, and then it's like and now one of the things I do when I go to a restaurant, and it's at least fun for my friends, I hope, but I'm always like, I'll tell the waiter or waitress to bring out whatever they want without any questions at all. And like, there's to me, there's like I don't know, there is something tied to maturity to that where you go, like I can eat anything. Like I can experience and appreciate anything that's, no matter how different it is, that sort of thing. Sometimes more stretching than others, but always like something that, I mean, it's changed a lot from when I was a child, that sort of.
I love that. That's part of what I want someday. We are in speed round, so I'll get
Oh,
back to
yeah.
it quickly. But one of the books that I read last year that changed things for me was Will Guidara's Unreasonable Hospitality. Such a good book. If you've not read it, totally worth. I listened to the audiobook; it was phenomenal. But it was about he and his partner Daniel Hum starting 11 Madison Park in New York and making it be the top restaurant in the world and changing it into that. And part of what I want to do someday is go have a plate at 11 Madison Park and enjoy every meal, even though I have no idea what's coming. So I love that. I think that's a great thought process. So on that note, what is one book or movie that's changed your perspective on things?
I would say there's a book called To Bless the Space Between Us by John O'Donohue. So speaking of poetry, and like I would say that was like my gateway to poetry is that book. It talks about almost every aspect of the human experience. And he writes a poem about almost every single situation that life faces. And there's one, look up For Courage if you're listening. It's worth it. Just type in For Courage by John O'Donohue. I never read books looking for facts or to-dos or things like that. This just like helps me like connect with like who I am. And so I think that probably had the biggest influence on me.
It's beautiful. What's one thing you wish you could change about our world right now?
Probably I wish that more people who had differing opinions could sit with each other and we could like pull with and treat people with a little bit more compassion in general. Like I think that when we don't create space for people different than us to explore their own beliefs, we actually push them further versus bringing them toward. And I don't try to pretend like that's easy. I don't pretend like it's fair, like any of those things. But I do think it's like a healthier society is one that like is able to engage and sit with people different, who have different perspectives.
I wish for that too. That's a good answer. Last one. What's one small change you've made recently that's had a big impact on your life?
Small change recently. Yeah, well, this is the most 43 I'll ever sound. I would say I told myself my whole life that I was inflexible. And I just like was like, you know what? That's a changeable state. It's not easy, but I would say like stretching every single day and then changing my relationship with like flexibility is something that is a newer aspect of my life and something I've been like really committed to.
I like it. Thank you so much. Adam, this has been amazing. We could record like a 12-hour long episode, I feel like. So much to talk about. If people want to learn more about you, read your book, where's the best place to find you and or get in touch with you?
Probably LinkedIn is, just type in my name. Hopefully you can find me on LinkedIn or you can go to my website. It's adamweber.co. But I try to post thoughts on leadership and life on LinkedIn. It was great to be with you,
Well,
Megan.
yeah, it's well worth a follow. Thank you everyone for being here. Adam, thank you again for being here as well. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me today on Changed. I hope this story sparks something in you. Maybe a reminder of your own growth or a new perspective on where you're headed. Remember, change doesn't have to be something that you're scared of. It's an opportunity to become more of who we're meant to be. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your story is unfolding and we can't wait to see where it takes you. Until next time.